Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha, Patidanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. All right. Nectar of Instruction, verse 5. Verse 5. Okay. Krishneti yasya giritam manasadriyeta dikshasti chet pranatabish chabajantam isham shushrushaya bhajana vigyamananyam anya nindadi shunya ridam ipsita sangalabdya. Okay, translation. One should mentally honor the devotee who chants the holy name of Lord Krishna. One should offer humble obeisances to the devotee who has undergone spiritual initiation, diksha, and is engaged in worshipping the deity. And one should associate with and faithfully serve that pure devotee who is advanced in undeviated devotional service and whose heart is completely devoid of the propensity to criticize others. Hare Krishna. Yes, so that's a very powerful verse. As we read last night, no, the night before last, when we finished verse 4, this verse is talking about, well, let me just say, Srila Rupa Goswami informs us what kind of Vaishnav should be selected as a friend and how Vaishnavas should be served. Okay. All right, so let us begin going through the purport. And yes, this is... it's all about different types of devotees and different types of relationships between devotees. Just a sec, what now? Oh, it's here. Sorry. Okay. All right, so, first of all, Prabhupada begins in the first paragraph of the purport. Prabhupada tells us that in order to intelligently apply the sixfold loving reciprocations mentioned in the previous verse, one must select proper persons with careful discrimination. In other words, you got to be careful not to interact with certain devotees, even according to the loving exchanges, to not interact with someone who's not ready for that sort of interaction. You know, most typically, that would mean that we shouldn't reveal our minds, reveal our hearts to Well, generally not to junior devotees, unless you have a very close relationship with them for a long time. Generally, when it comes to revealing quite personal, important things, then you have to select carefully who you reveal these things to. Similarly, we mentioned, actually we didn't mention very much, but when we were talking about prasadam, giving and accepting prasadam the other days, then we read how we mustn't accept food from Mayavadis. We should accept prasadam, which is remnants of the spiritual master or remnants of very senior devotees. We can accept those remnants of prasadam, but we don't accept the remnants of prasadam of junior devotees. Because when you accept the remnants of someone's prasadam, then you receive a little bit of them. Just like we did mention, to not eat food cooked by non-devotees, because when people cook and they're focused on cooking, then some of them goes into the food, so to speak, some of their consciousness. And therefore, if you eat food cooked by non-devotees, you will pick up some of their non-devotee consciousness. But if you eat prasadam, remnants of the spiritual master or advanced devotees, then you'll pick up some of their consciousness. And that's very nice. But also, because you have taken some of their remnants, they will have to accept some of your karma. So, for for you as a more senior devotee, you don't want to give some of your karma to a more junior devotee. It's not fair. It's really not the right thing to do at all. It will be bad for them. So therefore, as Prabhupada says, we have to learn how to intelligently apply those principles. And of course, there are subtleties with each principle also. So here then, in this verse, and in the quite extensive purport that Srila Prabhupada gives, then we'll learn more. Not so much about how to deal, a little bit, how to deal with different levels of devotees, but generally it's more how to recognize different levels of devotees. And then once you've recognized, then you can interact with them suitably. And you can also understand your own position in Krishna consciousness. And be careful. Be careful how you conduct yourself. So, basically in this verse, Srila Rupa Goswami is talking about 3 levels of devotees. Kanishta, in the purport, if you have got the book in front of you, first of all, there's Kanishta, means beginning level devotee. Then there's Madhyam. Madhyam means middle level. And then there's Uttama Adhikari. Means topmost, very advanced devotee of the Lord. Now, in the purport here, anyway, we will go by the purport. See, there's an interesting consideration we're going to... I'll tell you when we come to that point, regarding how Rupa Goswami gives his description and how Prabhupada gives his. But anyway, let's have a look now. We're in the purport there. And first of all, Prabhupada talks about the Kanishta. And who is a Kanishta? Well, at least, I mean, not that this is just the absolute, and only these people are Kanishtas, but these are kind of prominent Kanishtas. So, Prabhupada says, a Kanishta Adhikari is a neophyte who has received the Harinam initiation from the spiritual master and is trying to chant the holy name of Krishna. One should respect such a person within his mind as a Kanishta Adhikari. Okay. Then a Madhyam Adhikari has received spiritual initiation from the spiritual master, which means, in this case, of course, it means second initiation, and has been fully engaged by the spiritual master in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. The Madhyam Adhikari should be considered to be situated midway in devotional service. Well, we said that. Then the Uttama Adhikari, the topmost level. The Uttama Adhikari is one who's very advanced in devotional service. And Uttama Adhikari is not interested in blaspheming others. His heart is completely clean, and he's attained the realized state of unalloyed Krishna consciousness. According to Srila Rupa Goswami, the association and service of, to be able to serve such a Mahabhagavat, or perfect Vaishnav, is most desirable. So now, Prabhupada goes on, we're now in the second paragraph, and Prabhupada elaborates a little further on the Kanishta and the Madhyam, not the Uttama. That will come as we go through further through the purport. But he quotes Srimad Bhagavatam 11th Canto, 2nd chapter. It's sort of like these are the two classic verses, although there are other verses which are also very important, describing these two levels of devotees. But these are two of the very classic. So first of all, 11.2.47, a person who's very faithfully engaged in the worship of the deity in the temple, but who does not know how to behave towards devotees or people in general, is called a Prakrita Bhakta or Kanishta Adhikari, or actually this term Prakrita Bhakta literally means a materialistic devotee. Yeah. So, Prabhupada, at the beginning of the paragraph, made the point that one should not remain a Kanishta Adhikari, who cannot, as we read, recognize who's who, and therefore may easily relate in wrong ways with other devotees or the people in general also. Yeah. Let me tell you a story. This is one of my all-time favorite stories, and because it is, I've told it so many times, and therefore I'm sure so many of you have heard it, even a number of times before, actually. But it's a great example of a Kanishta, or even arguably a pre-Kanishta, someone who has not even yet come up to the level of being a Kanishta Adhikari, but they're kind of, just on the fringe, just right on the margins between Krishna consciousness and material consciousness. So anyway, this famous story, it's when Prabhupada did the deity installation of actually Radha Gopinath in Amsterdam. Radha Gopinath are now in Radhadesh in Belgium. But anyway, Prabhupada did the installation in Amsterdam, and it was quite a scene. It was quite a scene. The devotees were not ready. And the devotees, they were not ready in terms of making the arrangements and having the facilities ready. And they were not ready in that they didn't really know what to do. So they were really not ready. And Prabhupada was there. So they were doing all sorts of things wrong. And Prabhupada was getting upset. And there was one hippie boy who was a bit of a devotee, something. And he had japa beads and he was chanting. And he was standing right next to Prabhupada's Vyasasan, chanting away and watching and seeing Prabhupada become more disturbed by the chaos, not exactly chaos, but, the poor arrangements and some mild chaos that was going on. Anyway, the president then came to Prabhupada and said, "We are ready to do the fire yagya." And they call it a yagya kund, the little square thing that the fire sacrifice is done in. It was sitting in front of Prabhupada, just sitting there. And there was no fruit or anything decorating around it. So we're ready to do the fire yagya. And Prabhupada looked at this and said, "Where is the fruit? Where is the fruit?" Because you must put fruit, whole fruits, around the yagya kund, and then you do the fire sacrifice. So Prabhupada asked the temple president, "Where is the fruit?" And temple president, who didn't really know what was going on and hadn't been involved much in fire yagyas before, he went running into the kitchen. "Where's the fruit? Prabhupada wants the fruit." And he didn't even know, and the devotees in the kitchen didn't know, that Prabhupada wanted whole fruits to put around the yagya kund. They thought Prabhupada wanted to eat a fruit salad. So they did the quickest fruit salad of this Kali Yuga. They just, inside of 1 minute, or maximum 2, they had a fairly substantial fruit salad cut up and in a bowl. And the temple president took it out and handed the bowl of fruit salad to Prabhupada. "Here's the fruit, Srila Prabhupada." And Prabhupada just looked at this and it was too much. So Prabhupada just looked away and didn't say anything. They say that when Prabhupada was angry, he might chastise you. But when Prabhupada was really angry, he would not say anything. So Prabhupada didn't say anything. So he's looking over, and the hippie boy is right there next to him, just inches, centimeters away. And he sees, he's been watching Prabhupada become more disturbed, and now comes the fruit salad. And he can tell that Prabhupada is not pleased. So this new boy, he's a pre-Kanishta. He's not even a real Kanishta. He's definitely not a real Kanishta at all, but he's just a sort of a real beginner. He leant over to Prabhupada. He leant over and said, Srila Prabhupada, just chant Hare Krishna. He's advising the greatest Mahabhagavat of certainly of our time, to put it mildly. And he's now giving him some instruction, giving him some advice. This is not how you do it. He was trying to be nice, but you don't instruct someone senior, and you definitely don't instruct Srila Prabhupada. So anyway, those of you who are familiar with that story, sorry about that, don't mind too much. But I think it's very appropriate under the circumstances. Yeah. So yeah, the Kanishta Adhikari, and there are even different levels of Kanishta Adhikari, and like we said, at some point you can consider them pre-Kanishta, even though they're basically devotees or something to do with devotees, but they're not real devotees, like as the verse says, faithfully engaged in the worship of the deity. Yeah. They're not, pre-Kanishtas are not on that level. Yeah. So anyway, then the Madhyamadhikaris are described. The Madhyamadhikari is a devotee who worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the highest object of love, makes friends with the Lord's devotees, is merciful to the ignorant, and avoids those who are envious by nature. So Prabhupada has told us, don't remain a Kanishta. Don't do that. Yeah. So let's see here. Where are we here? All right. So let's go to the next paragraph. Right. It's actually paragraph 4. And this is it's more or less about how to deal with lower class devotees. And, people who can be classified sort of as devotees, but they're not like serious, focused, fixed up devotees. And actually, really, they are pre-Kanishta. They are pre-Kanishta. So, in the description here, sometimes it may not be 100% clear, but Prabhupada and Rupa Goswami and Prabhupada is talking in one sense about 4 levels of devotees, not just 3, 4. The pre-Kanishtas, then the Kanishtas, then Madhyams and Uttamas. So here now, in paragraph 4, which begins, this is the way to cultivate devotional service properly. Therefore, in this verse, Srila Rupa Goswami has advised us how to treat various devotees. So yeah, we can see there are various types of people who can be called devotees. They can be called devotees, at least in a broad sense. And even Prabhupada is including the Prakrita Sahajias as being they're devotees to some degree. So in a broad sense, you could include them under the umbrella heading of devotees, but they're not really proper Kanishtas even. because a proper Kanishta is engaged in decent devotional service, although they may not understand a lot of things, but at least they're engaged in, some bona fide devotional activity, some at least. But the Prakriti Sahajiyas are not really. Now, I hope you understand who we're referring to, what sort of person is a Prakriti Sahajiya. Well, Prabhupada says, they generally chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Okay, so that's, devotee pretty much, or more or less. But they're attached to women, money, and intoxication. Yes. So let me just clarify, in case you're not so familiar with this term, Prakriti Sahajiya, what really is a Prakriti Sahajiya. Literally, Prakriti means materialistic. Sahajiya means someone who takes things cheaply. So a materialistic devotee who takes things cheaply. And the classic example of Prakriti Sahajiya, and you'd be surprised how widespread this is in India, like particularly Navadweep. In Bengal, it is quite a thing. But basically, they try to imitate the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. So a man and a woman come together, and they are assuming wrongly that Radha and Krishna, when they come together, they just become involved in like real sexual activities. Not just some embracing and things like that, but real sexual activities. That's their assumption. So the Prakriti Sahajiyas then say, well, we must follow in the footsteps of Radha and Krishna. Yes. They're the most sacred people. Let us sort of emulate them. So man and woman comes together, and the man becomes Krishna, the woman becomes Radha, so to speak, and that's what they do. They engage in real sexual activities in the name of Krishna consciousness. Yeah. And they also, sometimes they take intoxication. And they think it enhances their spiritual bliss. I can tell you of one little incident I observed personally. We were at Varshana in Vrindavan, Vraj Mandala. So we were there, and we went to a place. It's actually between Varshana and Unchagaon, if you know the area a little. It's called Radha Bagh. Bagh meaning garden. The garden of Radharani. And it's a nice place. I can easily imagine how before it was a really beautiful place. Now it's sort of gone downhill, but still you can see in the past it must have been a beautiful place. So we went there. We were a group of devotees on parikrama many years ago. And we went there to have breakfast. So there we are. We're all coming inside, and we're all, getting ourselves organized. And then one lady who had had experience in such things previously, she noticed a huge marijuana plant. Anyway, a really big one, which was lying on the ground, and they were sort of drying it. And she walked up to one of these Babajis, who was one of the local people living in that place, and the man spoke English enough, and she said to him, what are you doing with this? What are you doing with this? And he said, we're going to smoke it. And she said, no, you can't do that. And a real classic devotee, she said, Prabhupada said, you cannot do this, which is completely true. But, whether he would know who Prabhupada is or not is another thing. But he knew what the term Prabhupada meant, because it's a term which is used amongst the Vaishnavas. It's not only us who uses the term Prabhupada. So she said, no, you can't do that. Prabhupada says you can't do it. And he said, with a sort of knowing look in his eyes, he said, our Prabhupada says we must do it. Oh, Krishna. I tell you, you go to these places, and if you tune into a lot of the things that are going on, you'll see it's like a jungle. I mean, a sort of a spiritual jungle. There's so many misconceptions and misguided people. So anyway, these Prakriti Sahajias, they're really into these things. I'll be Krishna, you be Radha, we will smoke marijuana, and then we will get together and, we will just have a wonderful time. In Krishna consciousness. Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Yes, so Prabhupada makes the point, although they're chanting, and they may even chant regularly, but they're not purified. They're in like a too impure state. Because we, not just we, but Prabhupada taught, and it's there just in our line, that just in the very beginning, you have to start following the regulative principles. Just when you start, not when you've come to a more elevated point, then you may do it. But right from the outset, you should follow the four regulative principles. So therefore, Prabhupada makes this point. It's a very interesting and important point, that such people should be respected within the mind, but their association should be avoided. It's a very important point. And like I said, in the verse itself, when Srila Rupa Goswami is talking about a kanishta, he says you should respect the kanishta in your mind. Now, according to Prabhupada's description, really Rupa Goswami in that case is talking about a pre-kanishta. Yeah, a pre-kanishta. And a kanishta, you can offer obeisances to. Not just, Haribol, some pranams, respect within the mind. Yes. So then, so Prabhupada then goes on, and at the end of the paragraph, Prabhupada's saying that these people who just don't understand these Prakriti Sahajias and similar, there are other groups who do some of these things. The Sahajias are like, the worst. But there are other groups who do some of these things, particularly intoxication. Yeah. So, Prabhupada says, they may just be like innocent. We're still in this paragraph 4. They may just be innocent and not really understand. And even in some cases, if they get good association, they may change their ways. But otherwise they should be avoided. Offered respects in the mind, Haribol, something like that. But a neophyte, a kanishta, who has been initiated and who is engaged in devotional service as such, as Prabhupada says, seriously engaged in carrying out the orders of the spiritual master, even though they're kanishtas, and they don't have so much description who's on what level and how to deal in many cases, but they can be offered obeisances because they've been properly initiated and they're seriously engaged in rendering devotional service. So, let's go on to paragraph 5, which begins, in this Krishna consciousness movement, a chance is given to everyone without discrimination of caste, creed, or color. Yeah, so the point is that in Krishna consciousness, we like to give people a chance. We like to give people a chance. And even they may do something wrong. But in many cases, we may give them another chance. I remember when I first moved into the temple in London, in central London, Bury Place. I had been there, we're talking about a few days, but I was living there. Head shaved, dhoti, kurta, saffron. All the young men who were not married wore saffron in those days. So on the notice board was a letter from Srila Prabhupada, which had just arrived. And someone had obviously asked Prabhupada, what do we do about people who are interested and they're trying to practice, but then they do something really wrong? Should we just tell them to go? This is particularly talking about temple resident devotees, because in those days there were almost no devotees who were not temple resident. You could have practically counted them on the fingers of a couple of hands. So there was this letter then, what to do about these devotees who are living in the temple. Of course, you can apply it to devotees who are not living in the temple too. But what should we do if they do something quite wrong? Should we just tell them to go? And Prabhupada said in that letter that no, we should give them a chance to rectify. And then if again they do something wrong, we should give them another chance to rectify. But then Prabhupada said, if a third time they do the same wrong thing, then it's better they live outside and come and attend the temple programs and like that. So we give people a chance. This was our point. We give people a chance if they've got some interest. You know what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Manusyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye, that out of many thousands of people, one person may try to understand spiritual knowledge, the truth. And that means impersonal knowledge. And then out of many of those people who have understood some impersonal knowledge, hardly one knows Krishna. So when someone has some interest in Krishna consciousness and they want to practice, they want to be involved, then we should definitely give them a good chance and really try and help them. And if they get into difficulty, we should try and help them get through it like this. And then such a person, if they're sincere enough, there are different degrees of sincerity also. But if the person's sincere enough, and they're really trying, then we take them in and we work with them and we really try to help them advance. And if they start making some progress, then Prabhupada makes the point, then they can become initiated. First initiation, as Prabhupada says, for the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. They can receive first initiation, and now they are basically bona fide Kanishta Adhikaris. Yeah. Sometimes there's a little crossover between pre-Kanishta and like bona fide Kanishta. But certainly when they reach that point where they become initiated, first initiation, they can be accepted as genuine devotees, Kanishta Adhikaris, and offered obeisances. So, then Prabhupada goes on to make, wow, what a point. This is such a point. My gosh. Fasten your seatbelts. If you've got two, fasten them both. Try to just take this in. Prabhupada is now going to give a type of definition of an Uttama Adhikari, means topmost level. There's no level higher than Uttama Adhikari. Even Radharani is an Uttama Adhikari. But, I mean, she's a super special Uttama Adhikari to say the least, but she's an Uttama Adhikari. So let's read what Prabhupada says here. At the end, the last, say, 6 lines or 7 lines of paragraph 5. Out of many such Vaishnavas, one may be found to be very seriously engaged in the service of the Lord and strictly following all the regulative principles, chanting the prescribed number of rounds on japa beads, and always thinking of how to expand the Krishna consciousness movement. Such a devotee should be accepted as an Uttama Adhikari, a highly advanced devotee, and his association should always be sought. That's interesting, isn't it? Well, like I indicated at least, Radharani's an Uttama Adhikari. There are many others who are Uttama Adhikaris, they're not on the level of Radharani. Yes, so in other words, there are different levels of Uttama Adhikaris, topmost devotees. But this is like, you could say, the lowest level upon which a devotee, if they're really strongly situated like this, they could be considered an Uttama Adhikari. They could be considered an Uttama Adhikari. That, let me just read it again, very seriously engaged in the service of the Lord, strictly following all the regulative principles, chanting the prescribed number of rounds on japa beads, and always thinking of how to expand the Krishna consciousness movement. such a Vaishnav should be accepted as an Uttama Adhikari, a highly advanced devotee, and his association should always be sought. Now, we mentioned Radharani as an Uttama Adhikari. There's the 6 Goswamis, they're Uttama Adhikaris. Most definitely. I mean, absolutely. But they're not on the level of Radharani. Yeah. And then you get like some of our acharyas in our line. They're Uttama Adhikaris, but they're not on the level of Srimati Radharani. I mean, that goes without saying. So in other words, there are different levels of Uttama Adhikaris. And, sometimes you read about, a description of a certain type of devotee with this quality and that, and then you read that this is an Uttama Adhikari. But those particular qualities or activities that Uttama Adhikari may be engaged in may be on a higher level than the activities that this Uttama Adhikari from Nectar of Instruction is situated on. Do you follow the idea? It's actually a very important point. That there's, at a certain stage, there's a crossover from a devotee being a very good Madhyam Adhikari, a very good Madhyam Adhikari. Then gradually they cross over to becoming a sort of a lower level, if we want to use that term. I don't know if it's even nice to use it, but you could say a lower level Uttama Adhikari. So we should look for these symptoms. Very carefully look for these symptoms. Because this is not, like I said, this is not just a good Madhyam Adhikari. No, you could easily say that what Prabhupada has said right here, this describes a very good Madhyam Adhikari. You could say that. But obviously Prabhupada has made the point that now this person, in terms of being engaged in the Lord's service, in terms of following the principles, chanting their rounds on their beads, and being absorbed in spreading the Krishna consciousness movement, this is on a higher level of those things than even the good Madhyam Adhikari, who's also doing all of the same things. Yeah. So anyway, think about that. I realize it's a little... Anyway, you've got to think about it. But over tomorrow, well, we'll see. Maybe just tomorrow, maybe 2 days, we'll just see how it goes. But over the following time, we'll read through the purport, and you'll see that other considerations come up about Uttama Adhikaris. Yeah. Just to kind of deepen and broaden our understanding of who may be an Uttama Adhikari. Okay, so there you go, devotees. Thank you very much for your participation and association. I really appreciate it. I hope you're finding it interesting. So tune in tomorrow and we'll continue. Tune in tomorrow and we'll continue. Srila Prabhupada ki.